Talking with Nestor Quixtan of Heavy Sports. The article is "The Maple Leafs Messed Up by Trading the Wrong Prospect." And what I love about it, Nestor, is you really look at kind of the domino effect that led up to this trade. And it's really interesting. It's one that I think a lot of Leafs fans would pounce on in terms of, those who don't like the way they're being managed right now. And I think a lot of Bruins fans didn't realize what went into this. But what role did Mikko Rantanen and Mitch Marner have to play in this Brandon Carlo for Fraser Minten in a first-round pick trade?
Right. Well, it's kind of like one of those conspiracy theory types things, And the thing was that the Leafs were looking to make a splash. They really wanted to go all in. And contrary to what Mitch Marner has said in public, and in the media, he checked out at the beginning of the season. It was obvious that he wasn't coming back. But the tip-off was an interview he did with Elliot Friedman at the beginning of last season. It was totally staged and whatnot. Now, I don't want to get into Marner, but the point is that the Leafs knew he was out the door. So they wanted to get something in return. Meanwhile, the Colorado Avalanche were desperate with the Rantanen situation because they didn't want to pay more than Nathan MacKinnon. So they kind of fleeced the Carolina Hurricanes. Then the Hurricanes realized that they made a mistake. They were like, holy cow, we traded for this guy. But now we can't really keep him because he doesn't really want to stay. Now, Rantanen did say afterwards that he did kind of want to stay in Carolina, but they jumped the gun. The Hurricanes moved preemptively. They traded him. And so when they were shopping Rantanen, the Leafs were one of the teams that said, hey, we could use this guy. He could replace Marner on the top line with Austin Matthews. And so one of the guys that came out with this was Nick Kypreos. And part of that trade was, we'll give you Easton Cowan, Fraser Minten. I believe a first-round pick was involved for Rantanen. And they had a $100 million 8-year contract on the table. It's like, it's here, just ready to sign. As soon as you come in, right off the plane, we'll have everything for you. Carolina was like, sounds good, but yeah. So then Brad Treliving was ready to push the red button with all the nukes coming out and said, well, we'll give you Marner. We'll give you Marner, first round pick, and your choice of Cowan or Minten. And that really seemed enticing to the Hurricanes. Now, according to the legend, if you will, the reason why the Carolina Hurricanes didn't want to make that deal with the Leafs was because they were afraid that if they did, they would run into them in the Eastern Conference Final. And that was actually pretty close to happening. So they thought, well, we'll take the deal with Dallas and we'll get Logan Stankoven. And I don't know if I wrote that, but I did mention that. It was ironic that it was Minten that beat them on Saturday, and it was Stankoven that beat them on Sunday. And so it's like, I mean, you can't make this stuff up, right?
You can't. You really can't.
and so Stankoven scores a game winner after the Leafs blew a 4-2 lead on Sunday. And so you get this situation where the Leafs are like, okay, well, we still have Minten, we still have Cowan, so we got to do something. And that's probably one of the worst spots a GM wants to be in, where you have to do something because you have the media pounding on your door, you have fans with torches and pitchforks at outside the castle walls, and the Leafs had to do something. One of the biggest areas that they had to address last season was that right shot on the top pairing. So they've been trying a bunch of different people that didn't really work. Morgan Riley, to his defense, was doing a pretty good job, but he's more of an offensive defenseman. So they needed someone who was a little more defensively reliable. And the guy that they actually wanted was Luke Schenn. But Luke Schenn ended up going to Winnipeg. And so it was like, what do we do now? We wanted Schenn because he had good chemistry with Riley the last time he was in Toronto. But now he's in Winnipeg. So then they pivoted to Brandon Carlo. One of the things that was out there for a little while was that the Leafs wanted Rasmus Andersson, and that was a pretty hot rumor over the summer. But Calgary wasn't too keen on moving Andersson, so it was Brandon Carlo. And a lot of the chatter was like, yeah, Carlo's a great defensive defenseman. He'd be a very good fit for Morgan Riley. but he's kind of on the downhill.
Mhm.
So the Leafs don't really know what they're going to get. And to be honest, Carlos played pretty well considering some of the defensemen that the Leafs have had in the past. So and he's given Riley the chance to kind of like do his own thing. Um, Unfortunately, Carlo's been kind of inconsistent this season, and this is why the trade is aging pretty badly.
Mm.
So when the deal was made, it was like, okay, so now we have a choice. Well, is it Minten or is it Cowan? And the Bruins wanted Minten. Now, the mistake was that the Leafs have this problem now with this incredible lack of center depth. So you've got Matthews and you've got Tavares, fine, but it's beyond that that's really become a problem. So the Leafs got Nick Waugh from the Vegas Golden Knights in the Mitch Marner trade, but then Scott Lawton got hurt, and so it's like, what do we do now? Now you have Max Domi playing on the fourth line, especially after Nikita Zadorov sent Lawton into another dimension a couple of nights ago.
Yep.
And so now you've got Max Domi, who was supposed to be on the wing with Austin Matthews. Now you got him playing on the fourth line. So I'm thinking, well, Minten's not lighting up the scoreboard necessarily in Boston, but he's playing pretty good. So wouldn't he have been a good fit for the team now instead of Easton Cowan? And to make matters worse, Minten's actually looking a little bit better than the ceiling he had originally been projected. So a lot of the talk around Minten Toronto was like, oh, he's a third line center.
Yep.
You know, maybe he'll be, in the best of cases, he'll be a good middle six guy, kill penalties.
Penalty killer,
He's not going to score a ton of goals, but you know, he could work out okay. And I can see why the Leafs were willing to let Fraser Minten go instead of Easton Cowan. Now all of a sudden, they could use that center, right? I mean, Tavares is playing well beyond his age. I mean, his numbers are amazing for what is expected of him. Matthews is holding his own pretty well, but then after that, it's off a cliff. And if you think if another center gets hurt, then who's up next? And that's where probably the biggest blunder. Now, before we get into anything else, I would say that, okay, you know, Minten, fine. But what really concerns me is that first round pick. That's what really concerns me.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that this morning, where this is looking eerily, this Carlo Minten trade is looking eerily familiar to the Phil Kessel trade. Because in that trade, the Leafs gave up two, and it had 2 first round picks, and ended up being Tyler Seguin and Dougie Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
So who's to say that the Leafs don't all of a sudden just, you know, go out in a glorious blaze and they just burn out completely, and there's no other choice but just to torch the whole team, and you know, they'll trade Austin Matthews, and then, you know, they'll get rid of everybody, and then, you know, it's another Shannon plan again, and we start over. And all of a sudden now the Bruins have like a top 10 pick, or well, that pick's top 5 protected, but they have another pick like this, and guess what? It's like the 6th overall pick, and they end up getting another star, a star that the Leafs could have used to build their team, right?
Yeah.
Now, the flip side to that is, well, let's say the Leafs turn it around, they win the Stanley Cup, who cares, right?
Right.
That's kind of like the mentality in Toronto. But judging from the way things are going, I mean, the Leafs, the Edmonton Oilers, the Florida Panthers, they're in a tough spot right now. And so there's no guarantee that they're going to come back and, you know, and just go on this amazing run in March and April and cruise through the playoffs and then win the cup, and who cares what happened in October and November. But I don't know, man. It's one of those things where this is shaping up to be a lot like what happened in that Phil Kessel trade, and I hope, at least for the sake of Leafs fans, right, it doesn't go in that direction. But fortunately, it kind of is.
Yeah, and it's fascinating looking at, you know, the deal that almost happened with Carolina, because now you're in this hole if you're the Leafs, right? Like you mentioned it, they've got the pitchforks, they're banging on the glass, they're ready for a big deal, and like you've shown your hand, and now the Bruins, who, you know, don't have a ton of leverage but have somebody that you want, say, well, we'll take one of those prospects in a first round pick. Sure. If that's what you're giving out here, even though Brandon Carlo is not Mikko Rantanen or anything close to it, right? All of a sudden you've shown your hand enough that you're like, well, we still got to bring in some guys to, fill out our team. And I guess to a lesser extent, appease the fan base. But you mentioned it with the Kessel trade. We go back even further, the Andrew Raycroft, Tuukka Rask trade. And now what could potentially come of this Fraser Minten and the first round pick trade for what will be at best, a year and a half of a good middle pairing defenseman in Brandon Carlo. If going forward, if the Leafs see a 617 area code coming up on the caller ID around a trade deadline or a trade time, and they're getting a call from Boston, do Leafs fans just want them to never pick up the phone with the Bruins again?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, you know what? I don't think at this point the Leafs really have much choice. I mean, they're pretty much out of picks. The prospect cupboard is pretty barren. If you look at roster guys, I mean, the whole David Kampf situation, I mean, that's a pretty nasty black eye for the organization because they've tried to trade the guy. And it's been out there that, I mean, they want to get something back for the poor guy. And it seems like the most they're getting is a 6th or 7th round pick. And I mean, why would you give the Leafs anything more than that if you know that they're in the position they're in, as you've mentioned? They've shown their hand, and then there's not really much they can do in terms of leverage. So really, if Boston comes calling and says, hey, we'll give you Casey Middlestad, you guys are desperate for a center, we'll give you Casey Middlestad, but let's look at the prospects. And that reminds me of the Scott Laughton trade. They gave up a Russian prospect named Nikita Grabenkin. And I mean, he's not setting the world on fire in Philadelphia, but he's looking pretty good. He's looking like that puck hound that the Leafs have needed to play on the top line, kind of like the Zach Hymans or Michael Buntings of the world that once played with Austin Matthews. Now, all of a sudden, you've got Scott Laughton, who's hurt. They gave up a first round pick. And, there's this prospect that's doing pretty well. So who's to say that, Boston or any other team for that matter says, hey, let's look at and see what's in the pipeline for the Leafs. They look and they say, hey, we could probably take this guy and work with him and, just take the pressure off being in Toronto and let's see what happens. And more often than not, those prospects have actually worked out pretty well for other teams. And it's just fascinating. I guess it would have to be an organizational thing where developing players isn't as good as other organizations. One of the teams I mentioned is the Colorado Avalanche. They're in a similar situation. They don't have as many draft picks, but they've managed to turn 7th round guys into regular lineup fellas. There's a kid named Gavin Brindley who the Columbus Blue Jackets gave up. They actually gave Brindley in the Charlie Coyle trade, and now Brindley scores the overtime winner a few nights ago. So you kind of need to have that sort of psychic ability to see value where other teams may have missed it, right? And in that situation, the Leafs have kind of struck out. Boston has done a great job of I don't want to say fleecing, at least as far as the Minten trade is concerned. I don't want to call it fleecing just yet, because there is a chance that Minten's kind of a flash in the pan, and he kind of regresses to that third center ceiling, and it's like, okay, yeah, well, the Leafs were right after all. Mm-hmm. But I dare say this, and I don't know if it's going to get out there, but to me, Fraser Minten's kind of looking like Patrice Bergeron. And that's a pretty bold claim, but he's looking like a pretty good two-way center. And if he does get to that level where, he can put up, 60, 70 points, let's say, and he's in the Selke conversation, oh my God, that's going to be one of those things where Leafs sites and, Leafs writers are going to be, we still write about the Kessel trade. It's like looking back on it, so many years later, it's like, what would have happened if the Leafs had Tyler Seguin and Dougie Hamilton? And then, they drafted Nazem Kadri, and then, they would have picked up a pretty good goalie here or there. And then all of a sudden, the Leafs would have looked fantastic in the 2010s, right? 2010s, instead of just tearing everything down. in going through that tank in 2016. So,
Yeah.
it's part of those big what ifs,
And I don't know if I think that would have been a good core to build around. I don't know if Tyler Seguin would have been quite as good as Austin Matthews, but we'll see how that goes. But Nestor Quixtan of Heavy Sports, the article one more time for you is called "The Maple Leafs Messed Up by Trading the Wrong Prospect." Great late night read for me last night, and so thankful that you were able to come on the show, Nestor. We really
no worries, my pleasure.
There he goes. Nestor Quixtan of Heavy Sports, breaking down how this Bruins Leafs trade happened and potentially a new Patrice Bergeron in the Bruins black and gold. Let us know what you think about the trade. Who won it? Have the Bruins fleeced them already, or are you not ready to go that far? Let me know in the comments section below. Then be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Of course, we come at you live every weekday, noon Eastern time, and then wherever you get your podcasts as well on the Wicked Boston Show with Cam Stewart.